Bit aside, Angry Birds Isle of Pigs has had one of the most interesting development cycles of any game I've probably ever seen. It's probably one of the strangest developments ever for a game, which is why it's on one hand so polished, but on the other hand so weirdly bland in especially the environments. You'd think fucking Angry Birds Isle of Pigs wouldn't have an interesting story at all, but it's so strange how this game came to be. I think this game is a super interesting case study on what happens when trying to make a game in such an orthodox way. So today, we'll be diving into the incredibly weird development of Angry Birds Isle of Pigs. Starting out with how development started. Two developers, Michael and Marge, best friends from the studio Resolution Games, just got done finishing a fairly popular VR title, Demeo. This game was a pretty big success for a VR title, but Michael and Marge's original idea of starting Resolution Games was to hopefully make a game for a bigger company like Capcom, creators of Resident Evil, since they grew up playing games like that. Because of this big ambitious goal, after the release of Demeo, they officially opened the studio up to freelance work, in hopes that a company would pick them up. Marge would actually wind up getting picked up by Rockstar Games for her ability to make beautiful environments, and she'd wind up working on the now cancelled GTA port for the Quest. Originally, Michael and Marge were supposed to be a package deal, but Rockstar only needed an environmental artist and not a programmer, which Michael was. This split up the duo, and apparently Michael did not take it very well, since the plan from the start was always to work together as a team. In an interview with Jason Blundell, Michael would be quoted stating that he'd do whatever it takes to work on a AAA game. He would later admit in another interview with Roger Craig Smith that making a AAA game without his other half, Marge, would be much harder than he'd originally anticipated. During the EA acquisition of Angry Birds, the original creator's famous quote that Angry Birds will stay on phones would wind up being a broken promise with the iconically disastrous release of Angry Birds 3 on all major consoles. The problems people had with this game were the horrible controls of trying to fling a bird with a shitty joystick and the lack of innovation in the Angry Birds scene. It was clear something needed to change, and somewhere along the way, EA decided that VR would be the perfect medium to forward the Angry Birds brand. In hindsight, I can see the vision. Precise controls, it's more immersive, and the 3D aspect made it an easy way to innovate. But in retrospect, maybe doing VR for such a high-class, high-profile game wasn't the best idea. Regardless, all that was needed to start this big project was a studio. But at this time, Meta was swallowing up all the major studios, greatly limiting the options for available VR developers. Because of this, EA found their way to Insomniac Games. Yeah, not Michael yet. Insomniac Games wasn't yet owned by Sony, so they were free reign. After some troubled development on trying to figure out how to make the next big Angry Birds game, development seemingly started going well. It was cancelled once Sony bought them though. It's a shame we'll never get to see Insomniac Games' take on Angry Birds, and the only reason we even know of its existence is that big Insomniac Games leak, but still, super interesting stuff to know that Insomniac Games, creators of Spider-Man, could have been working on the next big Angry Birds game. With Insomniac out of the question, EA needed another studio, and after receiving some passionate emails from Michael, EA finally decided to give Resolution Games a shot, and let them work on what would become the next big Angry Birds game, Angry Birds Isle of Pigs. There was just one problem. Resolution Games was a complete lie. Demeo wasn't made by a team of people. It was made by Michael and Marge exclusively. Resolution Games was the name they used to try and get hired by bigger studios, with the idea being that the two of them were up to the task as a team. But there was no team anymore. It was just Michael now, and he alone was now tasked with making the triumphant, brand new Angry Birds game all by himself. Michael was no modeler. All he knew how to do was program, so he'd need to now find some way to get high quality assets or suffer major consequences. You see, after the falling out with Insomniac Games, EA wasn't willing to take any more chances. So they had Michael sign a contract that guaranteed if the game failed, he alone would pay for the losses out of pocket. The only way for him to profit was to make a successful game. During this time, Marge was laid off from Rockstar since the GTA San Andreas port was cancelled, and she received a call from Michael asking her to help work on the game. She would decline, stating that, quote, Angry Birds is for pussies, and that she'd only work on a, quote, real man's video game, something with a Candy Kingdom. It's a bit unclear what she meant by this, since Angry Birds is probably one of the manliest games ever made, but regardless, Michael was definitely on his own here. So we started off by getting the core game itself down, programming top-notch Angry Bird physics, the likes of which have never been topped since. The game played just like Angry Birds Isle of Pigs plays now, absolutely beautifully. But at this time, the game was just made up of cubes with no assets available. It was time for Michael to somehow get a modeler for this game, and he was going to pay out of pocket to achieve this dream to avoid his own bankruptcy. He had to make sure the modeler he got would be of utmost quality, and that's when a genius idea hit him. Who knows how to model animals better than a VR chat furry? Michael hired a furry known as Dark Switch Pro, who now goes by Pointless VR, a notorious Boneworks modder, furry, and pedophile to work on the models. But he charged exuberant prices. Desperate to get this game done, Michael paid out of pocket upwards of $20,000. The reason it was so expensive was that they had to go through thousands of iterations of the birds due to EA declaring the original models too sexy. Some of the concept art for these original models can actually still be found in the game's files. Development was going smoothly, and the first trailer for Angry Birds Isle of Pigs was officially unveiled, and people were thrilled. Initial reactions seemed really positive, and popular Angry Birds YouTuber Downloadable Content would be quoted saying the following.
Wow, this game actually looks really good. Hopefully they don't mess it up like they did with Angry Birds Circumcision Wars.
With the news reaching far and wide, Marge inevitably saw it, and seeing her best friend make a successful game and fulfill their original dream without her, she would quit video game development altogether and would wind up working for pest control to take down termites. This will be important later. All that was left before Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR was finished was the environments. One of the major complaints with Angry Birds 3 was the lack of a Candy Kingdom, so Michael needed someone capable of making a Candy Kingdom. Especially with the most notable thing from the initial reveal of Angry Birds being the more lackluster environments, since they were very much placeholders. Michael would wind up convincing Marge to pause destroying the termites and come back to make a Candy Kingdom for the new Angry Birds game, and she was tasked with development of it. She didn't wind up making the Candy Kingdom due to a stomach ache. It was almost time for release, and there still wasn't a general environmental artist. So they brought in Spencer. He made a game called Salmon Man instead of working on the environments. Because of this, they brought in one more team member, Jerry Rig Everything, who would wind up making the environments. It was finally time for the big release of Angry Birds Isle of Pigs. The game would release to what would wind up being generally fine reception. People were absolutely in love with the Angry Bird physics, but the thing holding this game back were the environments. Popular Angry Birds game reviewer GamerTagVR would leave his famous review complaining about his gripes with the environments and the obvious letdown of it not having a Candy Kingdom. Genuinely, how do you do an Angry Birds VR game without a Candy Kingdom? What an absolute fumble. Jerry Rig Everything would wind up in a fit of rage hearing people express their distaste for his environments in the game, so he'd go on to break an iPhone on camera in a fit of rage. To this day, he still breaks devices on camera to let out his anger for the hate he constantly receives on all of his videos for his environmental work on Angry Birds Isle of Pigs. Due to the game's just okay sales, Michael wound up going into debt since the game made $10,000, which didn't even cover the cost of the sexy Angry Bird models. Marge would wind up marrying Michael and would take his last name, making her Marge Jackson. They fight termites together now, and none of them work on games anymore, with their dream of making a successful AAA game dying. They hope now to help Michael get out of debt by killing termites. And that's the strange story of Angry Birds Isle of Pigs' development. A game that could have been something so special if they just listened to the community and had a Candy Kingdom in it. Hopefully, EA will impress us Angry Birders with the newly announced Angry Birds Circumcision Wars 2, but only time will tell if they wind up putting a Candy Kingdom in it. I called Michael and he sent me a code to get Angry Birds Isle of Pigs VR 10% off, so I put a link to that in the description if you want to buy it. Just be wary, there is no Candy Kingdom, but maybe one day someone will mod it in. Thanks for watching this video, have a happy April, and I'll catch you in the next one, fat bitches. Lops and kisses!